Hello, it's Cried here, and we're going to check out if the katanas other than the ultra popular Moonveil and Rivers of Blood are worth running. If you're tired of these two weapons but still love katanas, this video is for you. We're going to split the discussion up like the claws video into unique and regular. The regular weapons are a lot more versatile because they can be infused with an Ash of War, and their scaling can be changed to whatever you like. Unlike the claws though, most of the katanas are actually unique weapons. I will be splitting the regular weapons into these categories while also mixing in unique weapons when the unique weapon exhibits the same properties as one of these categories. Don't worry, it will get a lot clearer when we get started. If you haven't watched my video on damage calculation and split scaling or soft caps, they will be linked in the description down below. They will give you more background on the reasons for the cutoffs or the effect of defense. Alright, let's get started. Once again, unlike with the catalysts, we can't just look at the attack rating of the weapon and declare, oh, this weapon is the best weapon because it has the highest AR, since weapons have their own unique movesets. Weapon damage is based off of motion values, or damage percent. Instead of wasting 3 minutes showing you the same moves, I'm going to focus on the parts of the weapon with a significant difference. After combing through the data and checking in-game, there are 3 differences when it comes to heavy attacks. This is the typical heavy attack of a normal katana. The second heavy attack of the Nagakiba is also a stab and not a sideways swing. The Meteoric or Blade does a kendo-like swing for both of its heavy attacks. This heavy attack is quicker than the stabs, and it makes sense for the Meteoric or Blade because it is the shortest katana. I've heard your requests and looked into the length of the katanas. I need to give a massive shout out to Catch from the Elden Ring PvP Discord for helping me with this. I linked his video on iframe data in the description down below. Nagakiba comes first to nobody's surprise. The other notably long katana is the Hand of Malenia. The Meteoric or Blade is the shortest katana. The Rivers of Blood is a tad bit shorter than the Moonveil and Uchikatana, but they're about equally as long. As for the motion values for the Nagakiba and the Meteoric or Blade, they're actually the same as the regular heavy attacks of the other katanas. The only difference is the animation. The weapon with the most drastically different moveset is the Serpentbone Blade. Its one-handed and two-handed heavy attacks, including the charged versions, are split into 2 hits. The status damage is also significantly higher, but the total poise damage of landing both hits is the same as the heavy attacks of the other katanas. The stamina cost is also the same. This is the heavy attack of the Serpentbone Blade. The heavy attack is quite quick and is like the double slash weapon art, except you don't step forward. An issue with the Serpentbone Blade is that it has poison buildup instead of bleed. As discussed in the claws video, this is a detriment when it comes to performance, because bleed is a stronger status than poison. The other big issue is that it can't be infused with an Ash of War, so you can't change the scaling nor the weapon skill. When the heavy attack is already so similar to double slash, not being able to choose another Ash of War is really a missed opportunity. Since we're discussing the Serpentbone Blade, we might as well take a look at the other unique katanas that scale to dexterity first. The Hand of Malenia's weapon art is the move we all learned to hate after fighting Malenia, the waterfowl dance. The FP cost isn't high, but it has a bit of a wind-up. You can also follow this move up to twice more. The damage is decent, but nothing OP for the amount of time you spend in animation. However, as we can see from the comparison, the Hand of Malenia has higher damage than the Serpentbone Blade, and is bleed instead of poison. It is also longer than the Serpentbone Blade, so if you don't particularly love double slash and its heavy attack, I would suggest eliminating the Serpentbone Blade, since even if you disregard Malenia's weapon art, just swinging the katana around will yield a higher DPS. Next, the Dragonscale Blade is truly a hot topic among katana lovers. Apparently this weapon deals 10% extra damage to ancient dragons, and 20% extra damage to normal dragons. I'm going to pretend this bonus doesn't exist for the discussion, just think of it as a small bonus when you do fight dragons. Also, this weapon, just like other unique weapons, can be buffed by other sources. The weapon art, Ice Lightning Sword, is a slow casting skill that applies a buff to your katana, which has 130 lightning damage and 80 frostbite buildup. This buff lasts for 20 seconds and begins the moment the color of your katana turns, so even if you're stuck in the animation of finishing up your weapon art, the timer is already ticking. Let's evaluate mathematically just how worth it the game thinks 80 Frostbite is. Let's think a bit like Sherlock Holmes. In order to catch a criminal, understand what the criminal is thinking. Likewise, in order to evaluate this weapon, we must think like the game developer. There are many different ratios we can pick, but I'm going to pick one where the weapon gains a status effect after having none at all, because it perfectly suits our scenario. As you can see from the Godskin Stitcher, Frostbite is 1.2 times more than Bleed. Let's confirm this value on another weapon just to be certain. The Greatsword has 120 Bleed, and if we multiply that by 1.27, we get 152.4 Frostbite. Round that up and it's 153. Perfect. Now, going backwards, we divide 80 by 1.27 to get 63 Bleed. As a reminder, other than Rivers of Blood which has arcane scaling to increase the bleed, all other katanas with bleed buildup have either 45 or 50 bleed at base. Therefore, the Frostbite portion of the damage buff can account for its lack of bleed. The big problem here is the lightning attack. The lightning attack remains a flat 130 regardless of your scaling, and that is a huge issue. The higher level you get, the more defense kicks in, and the less 130 lightning damage matters. The Dragonscale Blade also comes with a low base AR, so even if we add 130 lightning damage to its 562 AR, we're only seeing a total of 692 AR as a split scaling weapon. It only has 52 higher AR than the Hand of Malenia, but has to suffer from defense twice. This makes the weapon quite a strong weapon in the early stages of the game, something like pre-level 100, but the weapon begins to fall off more and more as you level up. Combine that with the pathetically slow weapon art, and the short duration of the buff, which for some reason requires 25 FP. I think it is safe to say, unless you're going for low-level invasions, this weapon is definitely one of the weaker katanas. As stylish as I think this katana is, I would not be surprised if a good Rivers of Blood player can beat you with one hand tied behind their back. Next, let's talk about the unique magic katanas, which are the Meteoric Ore Blade and the Moonveil. As a quick reminder, the physical side of unique weapons scales to default scaling soft cap, while the magic side of weapons scales to magic soft cap. The Meteoric Ore Blade scales better to strength, while the Moonveil scales better to dexterity, so we'll do them separately. The Meteoric Ore Blade has more physical AR than magical AR, so I'm displaying 3 investment paths here. You can invest more into strength, intelligence, or half into each. Here is the standardized version at 88 stat investment. I personally don't think the weapon art is that powerful. In PvP, it is too slow to catch any good opponents. As for PvE, I don't find myself needing a weapon art more focused on clearing multiple enemies than one boss. But if swinging around the blade for raw damage is all you want, Meteoric Ore Blade is your go-to with more strength investment than intelligence. As for Moonveil, I don't think you would be running a Moonveil to actively disregard the weapon art, so you can just invest 80 points. For the sake of comparison, I also provided the 88 stat point investment. Splitting the damage into dexterity and intelligence actually gives you more AR, but it lowers the amount of damage you do with your weapon art because your weapon art scales better with intelligence. Here is a test on the troll outside of Godric's arena. Unsheath is already a decent weapon art, and giving Unsheath a huge extension on its range just makes Transient Moonlight super powerful, especially because it deals even more poise damage when you land both the blade aura and the blade itself. Rivers of Blood is the other meta katana, and for a good reason too. Corpse Prowler is basically an upgraded version of Double Slash, which is another good weapon art. Despite its low base bleed, Rivers of Blood's arcane scaling allows its bleed to go much higher. Despite only being D-rated in Arcane, the weapon actually scales incredibly well to Arcane, because Arcane ends up scaling both the physical AR and the fire AR in addition to the bleed status. The soft cap for status buildup is at 45, but the soft cap for Arcane on the Rivers of Blood's AR is 50. You definitely want to have 50 Arcane if you're using this weapon, even before you reach your dexterity soft cap. Moving on to the regular katanas, we have the Uchi Katana and the Nagakiba. This is usually a decision of whether you want a bit more damage or a lot more length on your weapon. Starting with the heavy option, I've also included the Meteoric Ore Blade despite its dual scaling because of its high physical AR. If we check out the Meteoric Ore Blade, it actually has 50 instead of 45 bleed too. This means that it bleeds 11.1% faster than our regular options. If we take a look at the split scaling fire attribute Katana to make the Meteoric Ore Blade more in line with the regular weapons, we see that the Meteoric Ore Blade still has a stronger attack rating. The Meteoric Ore Blade is the Katana with the highest AR. Yes, it is shorter than the Nagakiba, but the extra damage and bleed can be worth the trade-off. On another note, by now if you still don't know why Fire and Lightning are better early game options than Heavy and Keen, make sure to check out my damage calculation video. Onto Keen and Lightning. I provided all the dexterity scaling katana for your reference, but I'd say the best option among the unique katanas is the Hand of Malenia. This is the lightning version of regular katanas. This is Keen at 80 dexterity. This is lightning at 80 dexterity. I would say the Hand of Malenia acts like the Meteoric Ore Blade. You're really deciding whether a self-chosen Ash of War is worth losing AR and bleed over. One thing to keep in mind though is the Hand of Malenia is quite long too, only slightly shorter than the Nagakiba. As for quality, there really isn't much to say about it. If you've watched my previous videos, you'll know that quality is trash early game, and the strongest physical pick when you max out. Here is a comparison between maxed out quality katanas and maxed out unique weapon considerations. Surprisingly, the Hand of Malenia is not far behind. As for the Meteoric Ore Blade, it has so much AR despite being split scaling that you can still do more damage than the quality katanas, depending on the enemy of course. Flame and Sacred scaling scale exactly the same. They simply give you different types of secondary damage, so alternate between them depending on the enemy's negation, even though you'll most likely be on Flame most of the time because of buffs like Flame grant me strength. Anyway, as you can see, Flame or Sacred is actually pretty competitive versus the non-faith split scaling options like Fire and Lightning at the same investment level. For a bit less AR, you get to have a vastly more powerful incantation scaling. I actually recommend the Flame or Sacred scaling if you like incantations instead of using seppuku on your offhand. As for magic katanas, they're pretty much a joke that you'll rarely consider over Moonveil. Even the base stats don't beat Moonveil, and barely beats the Meteoric Ore Blade that has a higher portion of physical attack than magic attack. Code Infusion, on the other hand, is at least worth consideration because of the Frostbite status. Katanas get a high frost buildup despite its speed, so having a cold katana can be very beneficial for proccing Frostbite. Do keep in mind the large deficit of AR though. This is a tricky balance for PvP because if you're dual wielding cold katanas, you can easily apply Frostbite, but you will lose out a large chunk of damage. However, if you only use one cold katana, you might not be able to apply Frostbite at all if the opponent plays very defensively. For PvE, I definitely suggest using one cold katana and not resetting the Frostbite status with a fire weapon. I will do a deeper dive into this when I have more numbers, but I don't think the reset is really worth it. As for poison, you lose way too much AR for a relatively weak status. I suggest avoiding this option completely. The bleed option might seem like a good option for some, but I discussed the issue in my class guide. When you're using a bleed infusion, you actually overwrite the innate bleed. So you're getting less out of a bleed infusion when you use it on a weapon with innate bleed by still paying the same amount of AR deficit. Sure, bleed is strong so you can still use it especially because katanas work well by piling up lots of damage with just one stagger. But in all honesty, I don't think it beats Rivers of Blood with a huge AR deficit. If you want to use a bleed weapon, especially with seppuku, I suggest using the Occult option instead. The Occult option usually has a huge AR deficit, but because bleed infusion overwrites innate bleed, you actually get more out of Occult katanas than bleed katanas since you can focus your stats on arcane. You gain a lot of AR for the little bleed you end up losing. However, this is only for the more meta PvP levels. If you decide to max everything out, this is a comparison between the non-quality suggestions. As you can see, because of the Occult infusion's crap scaling, bleed manages to catch up a lot in AR, so it really depends on whether your build requires more bleed or not. As for the Flame and Sacred option, I would not use them at all when you max out your stats, because they are split scaling and you lose out way too much bleed. In the end, I don't think there is a clear and short summary for katanas, but my advice is, if you're trying to beat Moonveil or Rivers of Blood, don't go head to head with what they're already good at. Their weapon art is just too strong. For example, try using something like a Faith Hybrid build mid-game. Hopefully, I've helped you learn about a few more katana options that would make even Sekiro proud. I can subscribe. Krite, signing out.